Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to welcome you at this forum, Federation of European Academies of Medicine European Biomedical Policy Forum, the annual lecture of 2021. As you may know, the Federation of the European Academies of Medicine is the umbrella group of medical academies and sections of medicine, of academies of sciences. At the moment, we have 23 national academies in Europe, 13 are academies of medicine, actually 14, 6 are academies of sciences, then we have 2 academies of veterinary medicine and 1 academy of pharmacy. And so all these elected fellowships of European academies are trying to provide excellent and independent scientific advice to policy makers on European topical biomedical issues. We are doing that both at European and national level, and we're trying to foster multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral cooperation via all the academy networks under the medical advice and scientific advice mechanism of the European Commission. A few years ago, the FEAM started a FEAM forum, and this is the subject of today. This is a platform, it's an open platform for discussion on key policy issues from the biomedical community. We aim to bring together representatives of all sectors, from academia, from charities, from industry, from trade associations, from professional bodies, from public health, patient, and capital, everything. And we want to be independent, to be objective, to explore together the European health policy priorities, to really convene experts and produce reports. And so before this lecture of today and the subject of today, we had other topics of interest that you can see here listed. A number of them have been quite successful and had impacts, such as the antimicrobial resistance, the regenerative medicine, cancer and immunotherapy, and several others. We are focusing a lot on One Health. We have a long-standing commitment to One Health, and more recently on shortages of medicine and inequalities. We are now taking also vaccination issues, both at the FEAM and at the forum. Now, these are the partners of the forum. There are 25 current members, and you can see here from charities, scientific organization, industry, academia, patient groups, and others. And so without further ado, today I would like to now thank everybody that is involved, and I would like to invite Professor George Griffin, immediate past president of the FEAM, to introduce the next speaker and moderate this event. Thank you very much and good luck. I'm stopping now the sharing of the screen. George, the floor is yours.
Good. Thank you very much, Stefan. Ruben, is the screen on for me? I can see Stefan.
Yes, it's on.
Good, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stefan. It's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Jaap Verwey. Jaap is a very distinguished member of the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences, and he is the Managing Director of Cancer Drug Development Forum. I had the pleasure of working with Jaap recently on a KNV committee that was looking at how to accelerate and how to make drug development more efficient. And all I can tell you is that Jaap is a master in this field. He was a master chair, he was very convivial, and he was able to get a great report, which has been accepted by the KNV board and has gone, I understand, to the EU Commission. So with that, I don't want to take any more time other than to say, Jaap, thank you very much for accepting this invitation, and we very much look forward to your talk.
Well, Thank you so much, George, for this kind introduction, which gives me far too much credit. And it's happy to be here and be able to present to you the outcome of the research that we've done at the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences in a committee that I had the honor to chair. And that was aimed to try to find efficiency gains through innovation in medicines development, and asked particularly the question how science could contribute to this. And as George said, I'm not only here as chair of the committee, but also as the managing director of the Cancer Drug Development Forum, where we continuously try to involve all stakeholders in an ongoing, ever ongoing discussions on how can we do better. But today I'll focus on the report and give you a brief update on the things that we did and the outcome of our findings. Now, it's not going to be a surprise to any one of you that are joining today that the development of new medicines that that are safe and effective and also affordable is a process that is complex, challenging, usually quite long. I mean, with the vaccines, people think that we did it quickly, but we had 15 years pre-development before we ever got to a COVID vaccine. And it's extremely costly, where a lot of the costs that are involved are due to failure costs. And here's a graph from the Netherlands where it shows 40% failure costs. But there are other reports where it says that this figure can go up to something like 70%, which is, of course, a lot of wasted money. If you think of drug development, it starts obviously with basic research and it ends with access of patients to a drug. And what we did as a committee, we looked at the whole chain of events over there. And when I started my teaching and my career in medical oncology, I learned that there were 100,000 compounds that led to one drug ultimately. We've clearly improved over the last 30 years, but it's still 10,000 compounds that we need to test before we actually have one drug on the market. And that's a lot of waste, again, also in effort. So the KNW asked itself the question, how can academic science help to enhance the efficiency of medicine and research and drug development, obviously without compromising on the quality, the safety, the efficacy, and effectiveness. So they put together a committee under my leadership where George was part of, and you can see the committee members listed on the right side of the screen, with an assignment to make an inventory of scientific techniques and methods that can contribute to a more efficient development of medicines and indicate what is needed to achieve aims. So we started working in early 2020. So there was just a pandemic that recently had started. All of the committee meetings were virtual. I guess this is the first committee that never actually met when it was doing its work, at least the KNW committee. We have reviewed literature. We had superb support from a secretary, Eva Nanik, that I should really mention. And we have obviously taken into account a lot of previous reports that were published before our report ever got started. And we took into account the whole process chain that I just mentioned, basic research up to patient access. We had several committee meetings where we discussed the outcome of literature research, and we decided to focus on 3 areas where we felt that science could particularly contribute to the development in this chain. There is we identified a true lack of good, truly predictive models of disease that could help the development of drugs in a very early stage. There is obviously a need for change in clinical trial design in an era where patient populations are being increasingly fragmented because we now have personalized medicine and we know so much about the individual biology of diseases. And there is truly a need of better patient access. In some countries, it takes years before a marketing approved drug is actually entering the market and can be used by patients, which is unacceptable. So we address particularly those fields that are indicated with the arrows over here. And in the report, we try to illustrate it and make it a little less, boring, you might say, by showcasing some of the issues with showcases that highlight what hurdles are expected and are observed. And one of those showcases date back to more than 60 years ago now, and that everybody's aware of the thalidomide disaster where a drug that was marketed as a sedative turned out to have major issues on the unborn child. And this was due to the fact that in those days, there were simply not adequate models, even on safety issues of certain kinds of drugs. That has changed, fortunately, but this disaster is still on most people's mind. It shows you that we truly need those models to predict the outcome of all of our efforts in the human being. And the lack of such models is the major hurdle maybe that we have to take in research and drug development. We truly need innovative new models. We need to get away from animal models. We can't completely at this point in time, but we need to get away from there. And there are fortunately developments that enable us to at least work on the development of those new models. Just think of organs on a chip, organoids. Particularly in oncology, these are more frequently used now, and they have absolute phenomenal value, but they need to be developed further. In saying so, we should also realize that we need to take everybody involved in the chain with us in the understanding of the value of those models and the limitations of them. So we need to make sure that regulators understand the value of those models, that they can work with those models as well in their assessment, and that we timely have the dialogue with the regulators. This is exemplified, this issue is exemplified in another showcase of a drug which is developed against rheumatoid arthritis, filgotinib, that was approved in Europe by the EMA, but was rejected by the FDA because of a model issue, a preclinical model issue. Well, I don't know whether the FDA has less understanding of the model than EMA has. It just showcases that the regulators worldwide have different opinions on the use of certain models. And if we would have known this in advance, maybe we should have used other models, or the developers should have used and could have used other models, avoiding the fact that the drug is now not available in the United States for patients that are in need of such agents. If we then make a step next to the clinical part, we clearly also need innovations there. I don't think it's a secret that the number of positive phase 3 studies that we do in the clinic is much smaller than the number of negative phase 3 studies. So the failure rate is still phenomenal. We also have the issue of the fact that a trial population does not always properly reflect the actual population with the disease out there. So you cannot simply translate all trial findings to the average patient population out there. And there's also this problem of the fragmentation of patient population due to the increased knowledge of biology of diseases, which means that we cannot simply do large trials in 10,000s of patients, but we need to find ways to identify a proper outcome in maybe 10 or 100 or 500 patients. It's much smaller numbers than we used to work with in the past. Well, there science can certainly contribute. I'm an oncologist. In oncology, things are pretty well set, but in many other disease areas, there still is a lack of proper insight into natural courses of disease. We still have no validations of many of the surrogate endpoints that the people are using in their trials. We need to find early markers of response in some diseases, response to treatment, prognostic and predictive factors for treatment success. And obviously, we need to make sure that the methods that we develop on measure outcomes are as standardized as possible, that everybody uses the same standards and methods. And we need to develop mathematical models for data integration. We need to actively involve the regulators as well in our clinical trial designs. This is possible. They are very open to this, but I don't think it's optimally used yet. And we are living in a day and age of digital developments, real-world data. Everybody's talking about real-world data that lead to real-world evidence. But the problem is it's not based upon a validated and standardized recording of patient data in the hospital records or the patient records. So that needs to be improved as well. So there's still a lot of things that can be done by science there. We then take the third stage, the last part of the chain, patient access, and Karen will dwell on this, I'm sure, because she wrote this report. You can see there is major inequality in something that we call a European Union between the countries that are part of the European Union in patient access. In countries like Germany, UK is no longer a member of the European Union, but in Germany and UK and also in Austria, patients have access to novel agents that are approved by the marketing authorities almost immediately. But on the other upper side of the coin, for instance, in Estonia and in Bosnia, it can take up to 4 years after marketing approval before patients actually have access to a drug that they are in need of. And I think that's unacceptable. Science could help in this stage as well. Science can help supporting the development of drug access protocols. Science can help in developing and evaluating the value of post-marketing instruments and their appropriate use. We can help develop in new fair pricing models. And I'm sure Karen might dwell on that as well. And we can help modernizing public-private partnerships setups. So there is a lot to gain here again by involvement of science. Now, taking it all together, we realized by doing our research that there is a scattered landscape in drug development overall. If you take the major stakeholders here that we identified at the top of the slide, patients, obviously, academia that I come from, industry that we can't do without, and the regulators that we can also not do without, they need to be involved in the total chain of events. And if you look at the white bars that are on the slides, that's where most of the involvement is. Patients are not involved in the early stages of preclinical development mostly. They are involved in clinical development, but it could be improved. Academia is involved in those early stages, but it loses its input in the clinical research. If you look at most of the disease areas, not in oncology, there I think it's okay, but in most other disease areas, there is a lack of involvement there. Industry, of course, is involved in the total chain, and the regulators are not involved in the early stages, but also not in the end stages. And it's different regulators, of course, in patient access as compared to the regulatory agencies that are involved in marketing approval, even though they are looking at exactly the same data and the same dossier that they need to assess from different angles. So we should improve on this, and this is a dream and a preferred situation where you can now see that the blue bars are interconnected at every single stage of the whole chain of events. It should be patient-centered. We need to develop drugs that the patients need. We should make sure that we have an optimal knowledge flow and develop the value of real-world data. We should early on involve our regulators in the whole chain of events and discussions. And obviously, there is an absolute need for collaboration between everybody involved. So if we take a look into the academia mirror again, there is an absolute need for improvement in education and awareness. There is no academic path for drug development, at least not that I'm aware of. There's no bachelor master course in drug development, and it should be developed. There is absolute an under-recognition and an under-rewarding of those that are in academia and are interested in drug development. Administrators in academia simply are not interested in drug development. There are absolute options to bridge the world of academia and industry in the development of Bioscience Park that you can now see being built at several places, and it helps tremendously in the interaction. We could stimulate career path then between academia and industry, and people could go from one place to the other, and not only from academia to industry, but they could also go back to academia. And I think it is absolutely important in academia to help the investigators there in understanding of regulatory affairs, but also in technology transfer issues. If we create appropriate agreements between academia and industry of major findings in academia, that could maybe hopefully lead to a more sustainable and more affordable pricing of drugs as well. So our final recommendation is, well, let's join forces. This is absolutely nothing new. We recommended the Dutch authorities to set up a national coordinating expertise center for drug development. There are a few existing in the world, but they're usually not national. They are used national, but they're not on the influence of the government. And bring together all expertises that are needed in the whole chain of events. Proactively support academic investigators in helping find opportunities of funding their research, helping in the technology transfer by developing technology transfer office, helping them in the legal issues in making deals with pharmaceutical industry, and make sure that there is a critical assessment in the whole chain of events of what we do. Because if we early on identify that a drug is not going to work, let's just drop all the efforts and start it with something else. So we need to make very critical choices in this process. That brings us to a much more logical chain of events in a circle where everybody's involved in a continuous flow of events that needs to go. This is a report that was based upon the Dutch situation. Our recommendations are for the Dutch situation, but very obviously, drug development does not adhere to geographical borders. I cannot think that anything that helps in the Netherlands would not help in Belgium or Germany. So we need to take an international perspective as well. And we certainly hope that our recommendations can also help the international community in thinking about drug development and making sure how academia can more adequately help to improve that whole process. I'll stop here. You can download the English report, by the way, in the link that is indicated on this slide. And I'm sure if you ask the FEAM office, they can provide you with this link. And I'd like to thank you for your attention and be happy to be involved in the panel discussion and answer questions. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you very much indeed. You have a wonderful skill, which I remember from working on your committee, of making complexity simple. And that is clearly what comes out at the end of your talk. We have to be socially responsible. The scattered landscape needs to be brought together, and that means talking together and having a simple plan. And the fusion of academia and industry, of course, is the thing that came out as the really, really strong issue. So, yeah, thank you. We will have time for discussion and questions later on, but we now have three main speakers for just 10 minutes to give their perspective of drug development before we go into the moderation. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Christian Silviu Busoy, who is a member of the European Parliament and in fact is a physician. And Christian, thank you for joining us. Do you have comments you would like to make at this point, please?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really honored to be here with FEAM. I have a long collaboration, and I always cherish the extraordinary expertise and the involvement of FEAM in the most important debates related to healthcare. I closely followed the presentation, and it is clear that we need a better framework in order to make available the innovative treatments to patients as soon as possible. When it comes to innovation and targeted therapies, usually one of the most important issues is related to the high price, because this is challenging for public healthcare systems, or of course, in some unfortunate situation, patients who have to pay for them out of pocket. But of course, it is not only about the budget, as it was rightly said. It is also about good organization, the right legal framework, a good partnership between health authorities and industry, and of course the way that investment in health is seen as a priority in some of European countries. I believe that we could use this momentum where everybody understands that we need more focus on health due to COVID-19 crisis. Policymakers and citizens discovered that we need to focus more on health. We need to be more prepared. We need to invest to also make easier the access of patients to treatments, to innovative treatments in particular. We just discussed this week in Strasbourg. We had the plenary week on the pharma strategy, and here European Commission came with a very good strategy. The European Parliament gave some useful inputs, I hope. I'm not totally satisfied because the IP rights discussion was not going in the right direction. Unfortunately, in the European Parliament, we still see a lot of ideological and emotional statements on this. But beside the IP rights, the input from European Parliament was good, and I believe that when we implement the pharma strategy, the situation will become better. We need to implement the regulation on clinical trials. We need to be sure that the clinical trials that are implemented in European Union should be rapid, should see less bureaucracy. You know that the regulation will be applicable from the end of January 2022. The legislation is very much improved to address the deharmonized interpretation of the directive across EU countries, administrative and regulatory burdens that were for many years a real barrier for conducting clinical trials in Europe, despite our extraordinary expertise, our extraordinary doctors, professors, academicians, and also the well-informed and educated patients. But when sometimes the companies are looking to administrative and regulatory burdens, they are discouraged. With the new legislation, I hope the situation will change. And of course, we have to invest more in research. First from European funds, and we have here Horizon Europe, and the cluster health is more than 8 billion for the next year, with a wide range of activities that could be financed. Of course, cancer is the focus, but is not only about cancer, is about also health throughout the life course, non-communicable and rare diseases, environmental and social health determinants, infectious diseases, including poverty-related and neglected diseases, healthcare systems, and also digitalization, tools, technologies, and digital solutions for health care, including personalized medicine. And finally, I believe that we need to build a genuine partnership with industry to give them predictability. Of course, they should be aware that we cannot accommodate everything immediately in the budgets. We need to take care of the sustainability of our healthcare systems. But I believe from my long dialogue with industry as chair of Industry, Research and Energy Committee, but also as a rapporteur responsible of European Parliament for the health program of European Union, EU for Health, I had many opportunities to discuss to all stakeholders, and one of the most important is, of course, industry. If we can build a good framework, a predictable environment, long-term agreements, and if we join our efforts, then they could understand. If they don't understand, of course, we could make them understand that sometimes very high prices on therapies cannot be accommodated. But as I said, if we go to a little bit changing the current paradigm and go more on the long-term agreements, I believe that we could achieve a win-win situation in the end, and most important for the patients. The last word is that we really have bright academia and top researchers in European Union. We need to invest more in research, innovation, and development. We have a strong competition in the world, first from our main ally, United States. Most of the most important innovation is there. Of course, the mentality sometimes and the paradigm is different, but also the high prices are also different. So the sustainable model is still in Europe, but it's not only United States of America, our main ally and our main partner. And I visited Washington 3 weeks ago. They are very much eager to work more closely together with us on COVID, on vaccination, but also on cancer, on rare diseases, on Alzheimer, mental diseases, and all range of important diseases. But we see more and more presence and investment from Asia, from China, from Japan. That's why we need to remain competitive. We need to guarantee IP, intellectual property rights in the Union. We need to follow the pathways to avoid brain drain. And we need to first invest from public money, European funds, Horizon Europe, national funds, but give the right incentives to industries to invest even more, because the most important investment will come from private funds. Thank you so much. And please excuse me that at some point I'll have to join my alma mater, University of Medicine and Pharmacy Bucharest. An important ceremony will take place today. Thank you so much.
Dr. Buzoi, thank you very much. Well, I knew you had to leave early, so I wonder if I could just ask you, I mean, you painted quite a complex picture, and the KNV report tried to simplify that into being socially responsible and having a scaffold, a much simpler scaffold. Can you see any way forward in the Commission to make this streamlined? For example, is it just DG Sante or is it industry? And how can you get this organized together, do you think, to make it more rapid?
Yes, you're right. We need European Commission as a very committed partner, and they have to act in order to change the situation. But part of the solutions and in order to resolve some of the issues which are presented in the report are very much in the competence of the member states. When we look to the slide comparing the access to therapies between different member states. Of course, UK is not anymore, was the second country, but if we look to that, it's not up to European institutions, because there we have the legal framework. It's true that some of this legislation could be updated with more clear terms and deadlines, but there are also the member states were against when we discussed the revision of the legislation. The big decision is there. On clinical trials, you know that European Union did his job with the new legislation, which is much better than in the past, but then we need the member states to act. If you look to the fragmentation in some member states, if we look to the ethical committees in some important member states, which are delaying a lot the process, or if we look to Romania, my country, it's not about ethical committees, the scarcity, the low number of persons in the drug development agency, which are not capable to assess in time request for a clinical trials. And here it's strictly a political decision to increase the number and to get good people, to pay them better in order to make their job there. So there are a lot, the most important decisions and the most important change is to be made at the member state level. But it's true that from European Commission should come the right legislation, and they could do another important thing. They could put pressure, more and more pressure on the member states to do their job via European semester, in the informal dialogues, the Commissioner for Health, in the dialogue with the Ministers of Health or other representative of the governments could do that.
Yes, thank you. And FEAM is just producing a report on health inequalities, which really underscores your statement there that member states, and don't get me going about Brexit, that I'm totally against, but that individual member states have health inequalities, and they need to be looked at. And the supply of drugs and the cost of drugs is very important in that, of course. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. You've given us a very good overview and shown that there is complexity, but there is hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good luck.
Bye-bye. We move on now to Antonella Cardone, who is the director of the European Cancer Patient Coalition. And I'm sure in our general discussion, we'll be talking about the time it takes to get oncological drugs to the market and to patients. And this is one of the things that I know Jaap is particularly anxious and keen to make better. Yeah. So we move on then to Antonella.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George and FEAM, for inviting me here today to represent the cancer patient voice, and good morning, everyone. I'm Antonella Cardone, and I'm the director at the European Cancer Patient Coalition, which is the largest cancer patient umbrella organization in Europe. And today we count on 470 members in 50 countries. We work essentially to reduce, if not eliminating, inequalities across Europe and within the member states. So we work for a Europe of equality, where all Europeans with cancer have timely and affordable access to the best treatment and care available throughout their life. And it is important to mention that at ECPZ, we work with our members to empower them to demand early diagnosis, the best quality treatment and care, and participate in decision-making and treatment process. So we influence and contribute to shaping the European and the national political agenda on issues related to cancer diagnosis, treatment access, cancer patients and carers' quality of life, cancer survivorship, including rare cancers. I would also like to highlight now that cancer patients are directly affected by the decision of the availability of new medicines, their affordability, and the effects that these treatments have on their daily life. At the same time, they have a unique knowledge and perspectives, being the ultimate beneficiaries of medical technologies. So patient preferences, experiences, and stories are an inestimable resource, and they ought to be considered in the agenda setting, formulation, and implementation of policies regarding the assessment of health technologies. So it's also worth repeating that cancer affects a vast population of patients, survivors, relatives, and carers. So the growing prevalence, uncertain prognosis, and the high symptom burden make public policies relevant in cancer research to ensure that the rapid development of medical and technological opportunities for diagnostics, treatment, and care is aligned with the needs and priorities of the growing population affected by cancer. So having said that, giving patients a voice in the development of treatments means we first need to listen to them. So we need to listen to patients. Together with academia and industry partners, they should be part of developing recommendations for when and how patient preferences can be part of decision-making, or whether or not to develop a treatment, if it should be approved and become available to patients. and what to do in case there are safety concerns after it is put on the market. To complement their voice, patients and the patient organizations should be involved in clinical patient preference studies. Taking this into consideration, at ECPZ, we are a partner in the PREFER project, which is an IMI, it's a private-public partnership led from the private side, from the industry side by Novartis. And the project aims at providing an evidence-based account of how and when patient preference studies should be performed to support and inform medical decision-making. So the increased focus on patient preferences stands within the global aim of strengthening patient-centric decision-making throughout the life cycle of medical products, including medical devices. So the project has established recommendations to support the development of guidelines for industry, regulatory authorities, and the HTA bodies on how and when to include patient perspectives on the benefits and risks of medicinal products. So a series of patient preference studies have been run in both academic and industry settings. The main aim of this is to provide a better understanding of the recommended best practice approach to patient preference studies. The project also shows how patient preference studies can give valuable information to support the decision-making for regulators and HTA bodies. In fact, we strongly support a new HTA regulation that is based on a patient-centric approach and that is aimed at reducing the burdensome administrative process of clinical assessments, supporting collaboration between the member states, and enabling national health authorities to make timely and evidence-based decisions about pricing and reimbursement of innovative health technologies. Yet we believe that there is more to be done to help to facilitate these procedures. Furthermore, we know now that a health system that understands and monitors the needs, goals, value, and preferences of its patients and embraces shared decision-making or co-creation of care would be more resilient to sudden disruptions of routine care pathways. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, the issue of forgotten and disrupted care for non-COVID patient groups has caused a major burden on patients, and patient organizations have played an important role in supporting information to patients and self-management. So to sum up, patient-centric approaches in research, medical education, cancer management, and care delivery are critical to an evolving paradigm in cancer care. And it involves navigating the healthcare system through patient's eyes, and it represents a flexible, multifaceted approach that can be customized for the best patient care. And I mean, I saw a comment in the chat before that we definitely need to use a better patient-centric approach as an ally for making sure that innovative treatments are accessible at the same time or almost at the same time across Europe, as the delays, as mentioned before, are unbearable, they are inconceivable, and they create huge inequalities in the survivorship rate among countries, but and also on the quality of life of cancer patients. So thank you.
Antonella, thank you very much. That is all very common sense, and we would all subscribe to that, I'm absolutely sure. Cancer therapy is for patients. It's not for doctors. It's not for politicians. And your approach is very, very clear. Do you have outreach to all of the EU countries for the work that you're doing. I got the impression from Dr. Boursoy that there was some fragmentation between countries. How do you approach that?
Well, there is definitely fragmentation. There is definitely a different time to access the different, sometimes life-saving treatments. So what we do, we try to work at European level, trying to make sure that there is a framework policy that supports the timely and timely access to treatments. For instance, for us is inconceivable that in Europe we have 50 different HTA bodies. Of course, these HTA bodies overlap and duplicate the work. So we're trying to reduce these numbers from a European perspective. But then we also work with our members to make sure that they, first of all, they are empowered so that they know the role that they can play and how they can play a role in the drug development cycle up to its availability on the market. So this is some work that we do with our members. But of course, we have members in certain countries that are more responsive and members that are less responsive. So, I mean, and also the member states, I mean, the governments, they are not responding all in the same way. So, I mean, we do our best and we are making a huge effort. I mean, this is our main priority. But of course, as I also mentioned, there is so much still that needs to be done. And we as ECPC, we are also a member of FEAM. So I do hope that we can strengthen the collaboration and the partnership, because I always say that, you know, together we can achieve better results, and we can be the best allies to speed up the process of accessing the treatments, especially cancer treatments for patients.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on doing what you're doing to facilitate treatment, which can be very difficult for patients. It is really, really important, and your group is doing that. We will come back, I'm sure, to discuss oncological treatments later on. So thank you very much, Antonella. And we move on now to Karin Eul de Groot. Karin was a member of the team led by Jaap in KNV. And Karin is a professor of health technology assessment at Erasmus and director of the Institute for Medical Technology Assessment. So we'll move on to Karin now.
Thank you, George, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the 10 minutes perspective about a long journey from discovery to patient access. Now I will focus on the latter, on the patient access, actually. And first, I would like to give a short background, because worldwide we face challenges to answer questions about access, affordability, equity, and sustainability of our health systems. The topic is very, very hot, and in general, in healthcare we distinguish 3 policy goals: quality of care, equity, and sustainability. And quality of care can be defined in many ways, but I think it should at least include effectiveness, including safety, and patient-centeredness. And our care should also be equitable, that is providing care that doesn't vary in quality on account of gender, ethnicity, geographic location, and or socioeconomic status. And further, it would be nice when our systems would be also sustainable. And according to the WHO, that is a system that improves, maintains, or restores health while minimizing negative impact, and it's focusing on maximizing benefits and avoiding waste. And actually, the ultimate goal is that we would like to ensure affordable and equitable access for all patients in all countries to effective therapies but in a sustainable manner. And maybe there are some problems or issues. Because when the results of clinical trials, and it could be RCTs or other trial designs, have been published, and when the results are favorable, so they have a clinical meaningful outcomes, there is no immediate access to these drugs. And further, we have to realize that also after registration by EMA, there are many differences in access between European countries. I've published a paper last year on cancers together with colleagues, and we studied the access to 12 cancer drugs in Europe. And marketing approval for these drugs came on average 8 months later in Europe than in the US. And also, as Jaap already told you, we found that the time between EMA authorization varied from 70 days in Germany to 1,200 or even no access at all in countries like Estonia. And our conclusion was that the health outcomes of European cancer patients are related to newly registered medicines could be substantially improved by faster regulatory or administrative processes, both on a European level and on a national level. And to deal with these issues, we have to focus on the high cost of therapy, and therefore also HTA, health technology assessment, has been introduced. So after approval of a new therapy by the EMA, in many countries, HTA dossier should be submitted to local authorities. And just for you, HTA is a multidisciplinary process. It summarizes information about medical, social, economic, ethical issues related to the use of a new technology in a systematic and transparent way. And we distinguish two phases, an assessment phase and an appraisal phase. And the assessment mainly focuses on clinical outcomes and cost effectiveness of a therapy, but the appraisal phase also takes into account other aspects like budget constraints, equity, value, and patient preferences. And the final decision could be reimbursement, so that's access for all patients, we hope, limited reimbursements, something for certain indications, or no reimbursement given a certain price. But HTA also doesn't solve all issues concerning sustainability and affordability. We have to reduce our spending, and focus is mainly on prices and getting discounts. And also, as written in the report, value-based pricing is very often mentioned as a solution, but so far with limited success. And at the moment, a lot of attention has been paid to coverage with evidence development. And this tool, I think, can be used to allow access to a promising new medicine, which has been insufficient data about clinical or cost-effectiveness outcomes. And therefore, we could maybe use real-world data by setting up registries. But the current reimbursement models, as we see now, didn't solve the problems for access and budget impact. And therefore, I think we have to develop new business models and pricing algorithms. And in the literature, many studies price models have been suggested. And these models include R&D costs, number of patients, years of patent years left, also, of course, production costs and what's the reasonable profit margin. And there's much discussion also about the transparency of R&D costs, and also discussion about should we include also the R&D cost of failures, that's drugs who didn't make it. But I think we need to change the mindset of the stakeholders in that respect. Instead of thinking about revenues and profits in an economic perspective, you should also talk about patients and their right to health, independent from where they live, and about also improve our health systems. And I'd like to conclude with an example of CAR T-cell therapy. That's a new promising therapy in hematology. At the moment, around 300 clinical studies are ongoing in many hematological indications. And the cost of this therapy are around 350,000 euros per CAR T. And reviewing of existing cost-effective studies revealed that CAR T therapy could be cost-effective. However, when we look at forecasts, we did a study in a number of European countries, the cost could add up to 1 billion, for example, in Germany. And in this respect, we have also taken the opportunity costs into account. What we give to patient A, we can't give to patient B. So by developing new medicines, I think more attention should be paid to fair prices and patient access. I think patients having a high unmet need deserve it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Again, a complex landscape that needs some simplification. Your comments on CRISPR CAR-T are very, very well taken. We have a new director of cellular therapies just appointed in the UK to look at this. And in fact, it's my son. I have to declare an interest. But the government are very concerned about the high costs, as you were saying. And at the moment, the therapeutic trials are funded by the pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers, of course. Yeah. So when this is properly evaluated and it looks very, very promising, then there will have to be some rational thought here about numbers of patients and
yeah. I agree, of course.
Yeah. So this is very much an open question still, Karen, isn't it? Now, I'm sure we'll come onto this now. I know that Jaap has some ideas about this as well. Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for bringing these important issues up. We're now going to go into a panel discussion. And we have Jaap, Antonella and Karin, and I think Christian has probably had to go. But then we have two extra members. We have Dennis Larcom, Director General of European Organization for Research and Treatment of Cancer, and then Martin de Coort from EATRIS, the European Infrastructure for Translational Medicine, who also, of course, works for Novartis Oncology. So I wonder, Martin,
George, I think you're mixing something, because I think Michael Zayak is working for Novartis and Martin is not.
Oh,
so,
right, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much. My brief is confusing. So Dennis and Martin, do you have comments you'd like to make before we go into the general discussion? If Dennis, you would start. Thank you, Jaap. Dennis.
Yes, thank you. Of course, I enjoyed the presentation and the discussion. Maybe an early comment that I would like to make is that I think the continuum, the different steps that Jaap has shown is very important, because there are gaps in this continuum. And where we have identified that there is a big gap, for instance, is in generating data sets that would be important for access. Just to explain a little bit is that to some extent, we acknowledge the agility of the regulator to make innovation extremely rapidly to patients, and that must happen. But we should make sure that we have the appropriate research after that, where sometimes industry is not incentivized, because we are talking about de-escalation, optimizing schedule, refining patient population based on biomarker. All this is a set of type of clinical research that can be generated by academia, by the independent sector, to serve science and to inform actually the healthcare system. And based on our discussion with the HTA bodies, we realize that today, taking into account the change of the environment, and Jaap has illustrated that different type of clinical trials and so on, the regulatory data sets that get to the agencies are not necessarily those that are needed for the HTA bodies. And I think here there is a big gap. So we at the ORTC, we have started already 3 years ago lobbying effort to alert on that based on a manifesto with the European Parliament. And I think that is something that has to be addressed at the European level, at the international level, also like Jaap has said. Just to give also an example, because I think it's important to give the examples. And I'm not going to take an EORTC example to avoid any conflict of interest, but an example of a trial that is going to be done in one of the member states, addressing, for instance, the duration of immunotherapy in the adjuvant setting of non-small cell lung cancer, testing very simple questions like schedule 6 weeks versus 3 weeks. Okay, so this is questions that are critical because first of all, you can decrease the duration of treatment. It's very important for patients, but you can save a lot. So when Karin, of course, is rightly putting forward that indeed there are constraints on the healthcare system, what type of trials, what type of clinical research, what type of new methodologies we can do so that actually when we have €1, we spend it at the right time for the right patient and in the right setting. And this is not answered. And we overtreat patients today, I believe, at the cost of very expensive drugs. And often innovation has not been confirmed for patients when you do late trials which address patient-centric endpoints. So not necessarily response rate or progression-free survival, but survival or quality of life. So I think we have to reinvent that and to restructure and re-engineer indeed what also Jaap has shown is what is the role of each stakeholder in this long process. And I think here we need to reorganize a little bit what the stakeholders can be doing with their own expertise and what they can bring to this long process, complex process indeed. So that would be my first reaction.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And that brings up again the whole concept of personalized medicine, patient choice. You know, I mean, some patients with stage 4 disease opt not to have treatment. And that is their prerogative, of course, and they couldn't be forced, but they need to have clear education about treatments that are available and how they might work and how they would help. So personalized medicine we'll come back to. Martin.
Yes, thank you, George.
I do apologize for getting you mixed up.
No worries. It's exciting to be part of this discussion. EATRIS being the translational research infrastructure for translational medicine. I think I would add to the discussion. Now, first of all, EATRIS is fully aligned with, I think, the conclusions of the report as presented, with personalized medicine, the patient-centeredness, and truly predictive models as important issues on the agenda. I think the question that raises, also having experienced the last years how that operates in the field of translational medicine, what does it practically mean? How do you organize such an ecosystem where all these players take their role? This is not a natural process. So the academic adding to the process of drug development, I think that the fourth element to the report could be added as the true collaboration. So a truly predictive model, it makes sense in a science perspective. But what I want to emphasize is that this process of drug development is truly multidisciplinary. And I think it is very good suggestion to develop the training and even a track within academia to train that. But we should also avoid that it is becoming a theoretical exercise. So this comes back to the ecosystem. So bioscience parks are great, the incubators are great, but it requires expertise, but mostly also experience. So what I would like to highlight here is the role of the academic person here. Are we asking the experts in the academic institutions to become drug developers, or are we going to focus on the way to organize that best with the players? And for instance, if we ask in our recent experience focusing on drug development that is initiated in academia and with industry, but Michael can explain that more from the industry perspective, I would say. If we ask what is your next step, or if they come, what is my next step in development? There is a lack of experience, obviously, to begin with, to start talking the language of the regulators. So there's a lot of mentoring and exchange needed here. And that comes back to industry and academia collaborating in a truly collaborative way. And that is where we should focus our attention on, I think. So.
Thank you, Martin. And of course, that is one of Jaap's major conclusions to industry and academia. Neither can develop a drug on its own. And certainly the clinical connection with Academies is crucial, as well as the basic biomedical science. And I'm sure we'll come back to that. And Michael Zeik, who head of medical affairs in Novartis Oncology. Michael, I do apologize for getting things confused a moment ago. Would you like to add an industry perspective to this, to the things you've heard today?
Well, first of all, a big thank you, because I think a lot of the stuff has been mentioned already. But maybe from an industry perspective, how we see this is we have to get better in medicine development in picking our patients, to really give benefit and acknowledge that the patients are the ultimate goal in medicine development, and to get better at picking our patients, the right patients who have a fair chance of benefiting. I think we have to get better at diagnostics, and we have to invest more heavily in our development programs into finding biomarkers. It was mentioned, predictive, prognostic biomarkers is really a key step we have to invest in, and into the appropriate computing power to generate artificial intelligence algorithms to make sense out of these biomarkers. I had the pleasure to visit many labs, and what fascinated me most is some infrastructure, like in Germany with the leukemia labs, where you have one lab perhaps covering 50% of the country, having a vast amount of resources, of samples, to really come up with the questions we need to select patients properly. So maybe that wasn't mentioned before. The other thing I am in complete alignment about is that we have to come to fair pricing of medicines. I don't particularly think that CAR-T is a good example, because of course the base costs for CAR-T are sky high, but there are of course many other examples, and industry itself, I think, is trying to improve the production cost of CAR-T at the moment to not that much avail, but we're working on it. And the third, and I think most important, and I'm really grateful to be part of this, is that everybody mentioned partnership. I completely agree. I think we have to do partnerships. I mean, I have an academic appointment for ever since I left the NHS, and vice versa. I've, with some success, always tried to bring in between 2 and 4 academics each year for a limited period of time into medicine development. And I think Martin said this beautifully. It's about partnership, but it's also try to understand where each other's strengths and weaknesses are. And I think in academia, and again, correct me if that's not a shared view, academia is particularly strong at ideation, at coming up with really great ideas. Whereas on the industry side, we have probably the strength of execution of programs to a time, to a budget, to a desirable outcome. And I think it is that partnership where each partner also acknowledges their place in coming to the aim quickly. And I mean, Denny is online, and how do we work with collaborative groups? And Denny mentioned it. There are questions industry can or maybe sometimes will not address, which is the optimizing of dosing schemes, etc., etc. So how do we work in parallel also with cooperative groups such as the EORTC to make sure that our development plan really then meets what Karen would say and what Jaap and I think what everybody has said, accessible medicines, that the medicine comes to the patient with the full set of information. And that's really, I think, this is one of the great webinars, hopefully, which gives the push into the right direction. And I think we'll probably have to have a few more of those, but I think it's definitely leading the right way. So these are the 3 points I wanted to make, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I mean, you brought out all of the essence here, really, that we started talking about personalized medicine, patient-oriented medicine, academic and industry links being important. So we all talk from the same hymn sheet. The questions now are how we can achieve that, of course. And there's one aspect that we've not covered properly yet, but I've seen on the chat and we haven't talked about the regulators, because my experience, I've worked in the States as well as in the UK clinically, and in the States, they involve the FDA very early on in, you know, we've got this molecule, we want to develop it for XYZ. And I was quite amazed by that, actually, because the regulators used to have a very distant approach from the investigators and industry. It now seems that this dialogue that Jaap is so very keen to foster is so important. How do you, Michael, in Novartis, handle the regulator and well, not handle, but talk to the regulator, and how early do you start to talk when there's, say, a new oncological drug that you are very hopeful for?
It depends on the medicine, but let me answer this in 2 ways. So the one, if you focus on a Novartis medicine, we will speak to the regulator as early as that is possible, because we want the input. And I always think, if people hear that and they hear partnership is not collusion. I work with many people whose projects, products I have to approve, but I have that partnership so I can approve them better. So it doesn't mean that partnership is collusion. So as early as we can, and you stretched it, George, there are earlier opportunities with FDA than there are with EMA, but I think EMA is making a lot of progress. So also kudos to EMA. On more strategic things like how to get new drugs approved, for instance, with minimal residual disease, we very much acknowledge that this is a joint project, and we're working with the Cancer Drug Development Fund, with other industry partners to really work with the regulator, because it shouldn't come from one company. There shouldn't be one single benefactor in this. So that's, I think, the 2-way answer to this. As early as possible where we are concerned, and in partnership where more strategic issues around drug approval are concerned.
Right, but that can still take a long time to go from a molecule to a patient. And the whole essence of Jaap's report was, how can we hasten that? And that I think I'd like to concentrate on first of all. Now Jaap, you've heard everyone speak now, and your initial talk about the report was very, very clear and actually very simple. And it was common sense to those of us who've been in the field for a long time. But then we've heard the complexity, which tends to sort of supervene. How do you think we might progress now that there is this really nice framework, which is down on paper, has come through an academic background in KNV? How would you like to see it proceed?
I think what needs to be achieved is that we talk together. I mean, that's the whole aim, isn't it? And that somebody makes sure that we do so. And we could all have our share in that. I've seen questions in the chat as well, and there are questions on animal models. That's the very early stage as far as I'm concerned. There's questions on the clinical trials. There's questions on data sharing, which is another issue that we need to solve within the limitations of GDPR, but we can still do it as long as we talk to each other. And I think the key word may be education and information. Michael has just said that EMA is doing a good job in improving their availability for early on discussions. And there's now this scientific working party of the EMA where you can go to with your questions on clinical trial design. Even before the trial has ever been designed, you can go there and ask them for their opinion. I wasn't aware of this scientific working party until 1.5 years ago. And I was involved in drug development from the academic part for a very long time, and they existed longer already. So we need to make sure that we also inform each other on what is available. There's much more available than we think there is. Yeah. But the most important thing is make sure that people get together, make sure we educate people. There was another issue on, it takes a long time before ethics boards approve protocols. Well, teach them, educate the ethics board on the principles on the clinical trial that you're talking and thinking about, because you can't ask somebody to judge on an issue that they have no clue about. Ethics board are volunteers basically, and they're people that want to do something good, otherwise they would not become a member of an ethics board. But they do not always have all the information that the investigators or pharma or who else in the whole chain might have. So information, and education. I think that's what it's all about. Yeah. But somebody has to do it and somebody has to coordinate that. Yeah. And that might be different in different countries.
Yeah. And one last thing, before we throw it open to all the speakers and then the audience. How do you think the regulators act in this? I mean, you now have the EMA in the Netherlands. And you have the backing of your government and KNA-VE. Do you think you might be in a very good position to really move things on? Or do you hope?
I think we are. And like I said, the regulators are open. You can go there. You can go to the EMA offices and talk to the people. They're just ordinary human beings with a certain expertise, just like all of us have our own expertise. As long as we recognize that issue and you just make an appointment and you start the discussion, the art is to find the appropriate person in a very complex organization. In that sense, as far as I'm concerned, FDA is organized in a more simple way, at least for me, than EMA is. But if you find the right people, you can talk to them and you get the right advice. I think it exists. We just have to make sure we make sure it works.
Yeah. Okay. Now then, we've heard the YAPS talk, we've heard everybody discussing. Do members of the panel have questions they would like to pose?
There's some questions in the chat, George, on animal models.
Questions there? Well, let's go to the panel first, Jaap, and then we'll go to the chat. Does anybody have anything they would like to add or to?
Yes, I've raised hand.
Yes, please.
Yes, no, just a little bit to complement what was just said. I think an additional challenge in Europe is the fact that indeed everything that is research is a European competence. So it's we can deal with the European institutions, but of course when it comes when a drug is approved, then it becomes, of course, a national competence how to implement it, and that's a big challenge. So there are ways, and we have seen things changing in the recent year. Now we have, for instance, the HTA regulations that is coming up. So there are ways where indeed we see that the stakeholders are talking to each other much more than it used to be. And I think we have to exploit that, we have to use that. And as you were mentioning and asking about the regulator, maybe it's the right time for for me to tell you that actually we have alerted the regulators about the situation in which academic groups are, with all the questions I alluded earlier. So what do we do with that? How do we, because it's very difficult, complex, expensive clinical research. So how do we answer this question? And we discussed that with the HTA bodies. And actually, I think, and I want to congratulate the European regulator, because they told us basically, we realize that we are part of the problem. So it's a common problem. And as a result of that, and it was announced last week at the European Cancer Organization Policy Summit by Emmer Cook, the Executive Director of the EMA, they are going to create a Cancer Medicine Forum, which will be actually co-chaired by the EORTC, where we will have a place to really discuss this question. So how do we do, and how early can we discuss these gaps for implementation? And of course, long-term follow-up, monitoring then what is happening in the healthcare system. So everything starts to be in place. We are in the early discussion. The European, so this Cancer Medicine Forum should be starting early next year. So more will be coming, but that's really demonstrate that we can do things and we can try to change things. So there is room to discuss, indeed.
Good. And of course, the joint industry academe groups in universities now, and I think, was it Utrecht that has one? Yeah.
Pardon?
Well, a joint industry university.
No, there are in Leiden. There are one developing in Utrecht, and they are thinking about and developing something in Amsterdam as well. But to add what Denis is saying, Michael and I are both involved in the organization of the next annual meeting of the Cancer Drug Development Forum in February, and I invite everybody to join, where we actually have a session on the issue on how can we help to integrate the activities of the EMA that needs to decide on benefit safety, and then the health technology assessors that are also regulators that need to decide on a different aspect based on the same data. So how can we design our trials to make sure that both of the regulatory types get the data that they need to make their assessment and smoothen that process? So you're all welcome to join. That's going to be early February 7 to 9 in Noordwijk aan Zee, or online because it's going to be virtual as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just before I move on to Janneke from EMA, or about EMA, can I just ask you, Jaap, about ethical committees and ethical approval? We used to have in the UK, in my medical school, for example, a separate ethical committee that had to approve clinical trials. This has now gone national, and you apply to an ethical committee that has the space to, and they are specially trained, these groups. You apply to the ethical committee that has the space and the time to take that approval. It could be in Newcastle, it could be in Edinburgh. How do you think this should be working to get rapid approval through ethical committees?
Well, we have a similar system now in the Netherlands, where we have a central system as well and a decentralized system next to that. The issue with ethical committees is that they have expertise, but that doesn't mean they have the particular expertise for the trial that you have designed and the topic that you are talking about. So we still need to inform them and educate them, because if you have no clue on the content, it's impossible to judge on the validity of the trial design. So we need to help each other. And I think the best way is a central system. Otherwise, you have to go to 15 or 16 different medical ethics boards to explain to them. But we have a central system, and maybe even a European system. Why not? The trial is the same everywhere. Certainly if they're larger, the topic is the same everywhere. So let's have a centralized European system where you can involve many more people with expertise on very focused areas, but still people know what they're talking about. And that's essential, I guess. Yeah. And maybe Antonella has an idea about that, because I think patients need to have a voice in that for sure.
Correct. But I think that's a really good idea to help rapidity. You know, you will get cognate ethical committees, and you know if you've got an oncological drug, you should be sending it to this one for a rapid response rather than to one which deals with cardiovascular medicine, say. So that we could that can certainly come out as a strong recommendation. Antonella, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. So as we are all now talking about common sense, I believe that one fundamental and basic thing that could be done is to really trace the different steps needed in the approval from EMA, and then what is done in maybe a couple HTA bodies to see where there is overlap and redundancy. Because I mean, this is what should be avoided. I mean, we heard from JAP that the clinical trials approval could be centralized. And this is also another point. I mean, what is the need of duplicating the effort, the cost, the time? It really doesn't make any sense. So there must be a reason why this is done now. But then what can we do at the European level to push to avoid this duplication? This is something that, I mean, definitely we should work all together, as said. And I think that the only way is for transparency as well, to identify all the different steps that are already made within the EMA approval, and then see what could be skipped at country level.
So do you think that application should be made simpler, Antonella?
Yes, yes.
It's a huge task to fill in these forms. Michael, you're involved with the EMA, a large amount. Is there any way that things could be simplified with the regulatory authority? And who would do that? Who would talk to them about it?
I think there are many things on the tactical way of how we do things can be simplified. I mean, Jaap mentioned it, like the centralized submission of ethics committees. Now we have a centralized approval of clinical trials that's coming from, I think needs to be in place for May 2022, and then we have a period, I think, of a year or two until everything needs to go through the centralized process. So these are all things into the right direction. But I think what has started, I think in the 70s at the International Conference of Harmonization, that also needs to continue, and Jaap mentioned it, that between regulators things need to be the same. Because of course our clinical studies, specifically in oncology, are not European studies, they are global studies, because we need to have patients of diverse backgrounds, and then of course that's not necessarily what we always have in Europe. So it's not just we are looking at EMA. EMA needs to work with the other regulators to come up with simplification here, and I think that would be the biggest step forward. And these are sort of the tactical steps we can do to speed up medicine development. And then there are the more strategic ones, like completely different thinking about medicine development, how we get about it. I mean, like Antonella said, why don't we do really patient-centered trial where we ask the patient, you know, do you get better or do you not? It's these kind of simple questions, and how do we get that to the regulator? These are more strategic questions. There are many little tactical steps which would really, really help everybody on this call, I think, to get the medicine to market quicker. And I often wonder whether it is trust, that we don't trust each other enough to really delegate those tasks of central ethics approval, having one voice speaking for all of us. I don't know. It's an interesting challenge.
Well,
I think we can see that there is already an effort to make global collaboration. There's an ICMRA now where the International Coalition for Medical Regulatory Authorities, they are truly, I mean, just look at the COVID vaccine approvals, even though they were still national or in a joint community, they were very rapid and they were almost at the same time. And that is at least makes the drug available to patient population, as long as they make it affordable then and approachable at the exact same point in time. I don't see why patients in Africa or China or in Europe are different with the disease that is the same. There may be genetic issues in their reaction to drugs. That's something we can find out in a good, well-designed trial. But the patients are essentially the same. So why can't we work with an international coalition on medical ethics boards or something like that, where only one approval is needed for a study worldwide?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, if anything, COVID has taught us has been the rapid approval. I mean, admittedly, the FDA have said this is emergency approval, and then they come back to look and then give the final approval. But nevertheless, it has worked, admittedly in a pandemic situation.
And they were in contact with EMA continuously. They were in contact with all the other regulators over the world continuously. So it is possible.
It is possible, absolutely. Now, just going on about the EMA, because the regulators, of course, are crucial here. We have a comment here from Janneke. The EMA Innovative Task Force has started an initiative to speed up development. Is Janneke online to tell us about this Innovative Task Force? I think we'd all like to hear about this. Well, if you look at...
Yes, this is Janneke.
Janneke.
I am sorry, I can't tell very much about this. It's online, it's in this link. I just thought I'd mention it as an interesting initiative that at least the EMA is working in a progressive way to get more speed on the use of non-animal methods or approach methods.
Right, and this is aimed at speeding up development of drugs or uptake or both?
Both. That's what I think.
Good. Did I see somebody's hand up to give us some information on that?
Well, maybe from Beatrice's perspective, I can...
Martin, do you have information on this initiative?
Not in this one specific, but maybe I would like to comment on the role of the academic here as well. There's always this look at the regulator, and the regulator says how it's be done and not. But I think we see that the EMA is definitely seeking this dialogue earlier because regulations are dynamic in itself as well. So it's really also a call to the academia to encounter in this dialogue with innovations. When we talk about predictive models, is this 3D organoid or my organ on a chip at some point ready to replace an animal study or not? And that's where you need a dialogue with the regulator, because it is about assessment of safety, efficacy, the quality for the patient. And there are reasons to draw a line somewhere, but there's also a movement. And I think this initiative is an example of an invitation to the academic community to take on this dialogue. And this needs time, this needs awareness. We need to find out how this works, this dialogue. But I know that last week there was a workshop, the STARS workshop. This is an initiative, a coordination and support action, which is exactly about these initiatives. And I would like to echo the words that Jaap said, that it is indeed about knowing that these initiatives are going on and take part of them in them actively. So, and this is also part of, I think, a true collaboration between regulator and academic society, which in itself is a maturing discipline of regulatory science.
Good, thank you, Martin. That's very helpful. And it sounds like a very good way forward. Jaap, have you been part of this initiative? Because this is very much your field.
No, I wasn't. That's a very brief answer.
Right, good. Well, thank you for being brief. But it strikes me that another word which we can use as a theme here is communication, and that we need to have adequate communication between all of these domains so that we know what's happening. I'm not going to bring it up now, but I want to bring up education, and education for medical students, medical personnel, and also, of course, for patients, because clarity is really, really important, and simplicity of that clarity. But Michael, you have your hand raised now.
Yeah, I wanted to supplement a little bit what Martin said. So I'm a clinician. I've worked, I think, 7 years in various labs as part of that. But I mean, models are great, and I think we have a lot to do to improve them. And as Martin said, there will be somewhere a border of where that doesn't improve anymore. But also, when I look at what's the future in my area of interest, which is oncology, immunology, I am not sure whether models will ever replace the use in humans because of the complex, at least three-way interaction between tumor, patient, environment, immune system. And hence, I'm still a strong believer of investing heavily into good biomarkers to safely expose patients much earlier on and get relevant outcomes in patients where that is justifiable and where we can quickly discontinue medicines if we see certain biomarkers changing. I think that's, at least in my limited experience, much more beneficial than investing heavily just on the model side, because I do agree with Martin that there will be, I think, a ceiling which we cannot break through with models, and we have to be responsible to patients and not illusion them, and rather get better with biomarkers and drive our medicine development responsibly that way.
Okay. Well, as you know, Michael, there's a big trial just started in the UK. Admittedly, it's for cancer screening,
yeah,
but it will be for following patients who have chemotherapy to look at any progression of their tumor, looking at DNA fragments in blood. And this is a very, very major study. I think 400,000 patients with different forms of solid tumors, and will be used for screening and for following, as we hope, a good biomarker.
The problem we still have to solve in the whole system is that the amount of money that is required in a clinical setting. Ooh, somebody's getting a phone call. Yeah. Okay, you can hear me again. Now, the cost per unit in a clinical trial is much higher than the cost per unit in the preclinical development. You can see that curve going up exponentially once you enter the clinic. So we need to make sure that we do not waste money in a needless way by running too fast in the clinic. So even though I admit that in the ultimate end, the patient information is the most appropriate one that we can get and need, I still would favor that we do as much as we can in the preclinical stage to make sure that we do not run in the wrong direction once we enter into the clinic. So we need to find a way out there. That doesn't mean we need animal models, but we need some kind of models. You're muted now, George. You're still muted. Yeah.
Is that on now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that Karin will have something to say here. One of the things you mentioned early on, Jaap, in your talk was it's very difficult to stop a project. And the big pharma, and I know from my experience on SABs in the States, they keep persevering, even though the results are very marginal. And it's very difficult to say, right, we're going to stop this. It's going to cost too much money. it's not going to work. And organoids may help us in that field if we see rapid cell death, say, something like that, at low concentrations. But nevertheless, I agree entirely with you, Jaap. The patient is the person who's going to receive this treatment, and you should get into patients as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and there may be fields where organoids will not help us. I just think of psychiatric issues. The mind of a person is something I don't see how you can get it into a model that is preclinical. So yeah. It's the system that is important then, and it's the system where we need to have the information on, of course.
Right, and pharmacokinetics, of course. You know, it might be totally skewed.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Karen.
Yeah, I can add a little bit maybe, because you say it's very difficult to stop a study, but it's also sometimes there are promising results, but just for a small group of patients, it's also stopped because it's not interested from perspective of a market. That's too small groups, or so that's another problem maybe, and maybe then it's also interesting to see whether some repurposing research is an option, or
right. And of course the regulation of animal experiments is now and must be, of course, very, very tight and well supervised and watched. Can I just bring up the question of education? We've mentioned that for patients, and I want to go back to Antonella in just a moment to ask about patient education, because that is so important that patients understand and know, and how can this be done, and how does it need improving. But also education of medical students and paramedical people. I had no idea during my medical degree about how a drug was developed, none. We had courses in clinical pharmacology, but it was all how drugs work, not how you get them, not how you manufacture them, not how you make them safe. And I still think this is a real lacuna in medical education. And I'm going to ask the panel about that in a moment, how we might improve it. But I'd like to go to Antonella to talk about patient education and how we can help patients understand their disease and how they can understand the treatment that they're going to get in a more positive and accessible way. Antonella.
Yep. Well, of course, for us, health literacy is another of our priorities, and then also, you know, education in general. Like for instance, for HTA, we are working a lot on this topic. Of course, we cannot work on everything, so we are trying to focus on different topics and work step by step. For instance, on HTA, we have developed in 2019 an e-learning module to motivate cancer patients. So to explain what HTA is, so one piece of the journey of the drug development, of the drug access to the market. But so we started with HTA and this e-learning module to motivate, which explains what HTA is and why cancer patients should be involved. So it is to motivate cancer patients to be involved in the process. Then we have developed a further step. We have developed a toolkit, which is a step-by-step, but you know, the toolkit, it's a step-by-step on what cancer patients need to do. It's country-based because every country has its own system. So now we are working on that. And then another big challenge that we have at European level, compared to the US, for instance, is the language barrier, which is now I'm not speaking of the language, you know, academic research language, language accessible to patient, just the language like French, English, Italian, and this is a huge obstacle that we have, and it adds a burden. So we are working on that. I mean, we are doing, I mean, as I said, step by step, there is a huge work that needs to be done. There are also other organizations working on developing this, what is called the patient expert, providing, you know, all sorts of information and the training on how to develop expertise among the patient community. And then, of course, the other important thing is that when doctors speak to a patient, I mean, now a patient is much more educated than a few years ago, thanks to internet. But then sometimes the information that the patient has is misleading, and so the healthcare providers has to do more work to, you know, delete the wrong information. So I think it's really it's all under development. This communication between patients and the healthcare professionals is really under development. I mean, we are working on that as well.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that came over from Dr. Buzoy was that individual member states in the EU do what they want. And so, you know, that's a bit of a shame to say that you can do that. And I'm seeing that. I'm writing something about adult vaccination at the moment. Vaccination procedures for older people are completely haphazard throughout EU member states. There isn't a unified system, but I mean, I won't go into that at the moment. Karin, Erasmus, do you have any medical education on the development of a drug to medical students?
Yeah. Not specific on the development part, but just the later part. So HCA courses, we have also master programs and also other online tools. So these tools are available then.
In the ordinary undergraduate medical degree,
yes,
it's still the same as I got.
Yeah, but our students are studying health sciences, so it's also, they are broader educated, of course. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Jaap, you've been in the middle of universities for a long time. Do you think we could improve this as well? That would help people, help medics and paramedics?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was involved in drug development from the academic perspective all of my career, and I had no training. I was self-trained. I guess Michael could say the same from his part. There is no training that I know of that is academic. And this is maybe one of the barriers that are there for people that want to move from academia to industry or vice versa. And it's also a barrier in the mutual understanding of what we do. So I think it should be developed, and it shouldn't be that easy, that difficult, and it can be international easily.
Yeah, and I mean, it wouldn't take long, would it? You know.
No, there bits and pieces are existing everywhere over the world, I'm sure. They just need to be linked together again. It's lack of communication again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, this communication is coming up all the time, isn't it, between different groups and understanding.
I understand Michael and Denis could comment on that as well, because they raised their hands on it.
Michael, would you like to comment on education?
Yeah, I mean, undergraduate, when I was in a country role for 10 years in the UK, we always offered a program like at Queen Mary's and King's where students could go on their Wednesday afternoon, which was normally reserved for many other things, to listen to medicine development courses, which included HTA. And as I said, postgraduate, we always look to have exchange programs with varying success to get what Martin said, is to have this fluid exchange between academia and industry. And I think we can get much better at it. I often wonder how can we do that? I don't know what the right forum for that is, but I think industry is probably very willing. I mean, we're all willing I mean, we're all academics, or many of us are academics, still with a lecture contract, even if it's just an honorary one, to do something, and most of us love it. So we just wait for the invitation.
In an undergraduate course or a professional diploma course, it wouldn't take long to do. I mean, just, you know, some lectures and discussion to make people in the field understand that you don't just get drugs off a shelf.
No, exactly. And there are courses. I mean, Jaap said that there are courses at King's, but they are often taken not by medical students, they're taken by other disciplines. So to offer this as formal part of an undergraduate curriculum, I don't know whether anybody has that.
In clinical pharmacology, 2 lectures would do it. I mean, it would be simple.
Possibly.
Now, time is getting on, but I want to just address one other important point which affects patients and industry and so on after the regulation. Karen, you mentioned access after approval, and this be shortened. And this strikes me as being so strange, really, doesn't it? Because you get approval, you've got to manufacture, you've got to get it out and so on. But that can take a year or so, if not longer. Who is responsible to improve this, do you think, Karen?
Yeah, one of the problems is in Europe that every country, the company have to negotiate with every country about prices and so on. Right? For example, in the Netherlands, then it's put in a lock, and then there's no negotiation time. For CAR T cells, it lasted, I think, 400 days or something like that. So that's good. And sometimes there are some programs like early access or compassionate use programs that patients still have some access, but these procedures are different in all countries. And for example, in Germany, there's immediate access, but then there's 1 year for negotiation. But there's another system than, for example, in the UK or in the Netherlands.
Yeah. This is a thing that I think you brought up earlier on. Is there any way forward here, do you think, or has it just got to go through the machinations of pricing and
well, here we are depending on the European Parliament. If we are talking about a union, we should act as a union and not as 27 different countries that are just joined together and discuss. So it is also trying to get the spirit there that there is a patient need here. I just think it's unacceptable that a patient in Estonia has to wait for a drug for 4 years while the same patient in Germany could get it immediately. Then you don't act as a union. I realize that there is also affordability issues. So we need to take that into account. We need to take that into account anyway, because the sky is no longer the limit for drug pricing. But again, it's an issue of talking together, making sure that we have an aim and develop something that is joint.
It's quite complex, because also when you have lower prices in Estonia, then there are some parallel import possibilities or options, and then the Netherlands can still buy from Estonia, and then patients in Estonia still don't have access.
Yes.
So there are also other problems I wasn't aware of at first, but...
There's a very funny discussion ongoing now on the internet that in the United States, there is no discussion. Medicare has to pay for everything that's being approved by FDA. They're now talking about changing that for small molecules. And then, of course, everybody's going to say, well, then the companies are only going to develop antibodies because they are not small molecules. And then they still can ask the price that they want. I don't think that's going to happen, but you can see that this issue is something that everybody's struggling with. Yeah. Michael, you had a comment there. You're from pharma.
Yeah, but I think I'm also a patient. I'm also an academic. I'm also a citizen. So I think we all acknowledge that we have to get better at getting access. So, and Karen said it, every country has not just their different process, but they also ask different criteria. So for instance, in Germany,
yes, I'm sure.
It's overall survival. In other countries, it's something else. So I think some harmonization would be great. But then the other thing, and I think we're trying to do, and CAR T cell is a good example, and other even more costly therapies are in the same league, is we have to come to better risk sharing, that we agree on how do we share the risk. Because of course, when we bring a medicine for patent issues, there isn't a huge amount of experience. I cannot launch a medicine with 10 years experience because then I have no patent and there's no return. So we need to come up with the payer with some reasonable risk-sharing agreements. And I think in some like gene therapies, we have succeeded. In CAR-T and places we have succeeded, and we can get better at it to really put the risk, how we see the risk and how we want to share that risk financially in the future as partners. And I think that's for me the ultimate way to have access in countries.
That's very, very wise, Michael. You know, going back to COVID again, the new small molecules for treatment of COVID, ritonavir plus the Pfizer drug, whose name I cannot pronounce. I don't know why they make it so complicated, but you know that has got emergency approval almost straight away from FDA, and it will, and the UK are going to do the same, and that will be available very, very soon. Now, so it can be done. It's the antihypertensives, it's the oncological treatments that, and now the CAR-T and so on, that seem to be taking a lot of time to get to the patient. So a long time to develop, a long time to test, and then a long time to get out. And if anything came out of Jaap's wonderful document to CNOR, it's let's make things faster, let's communicate, everybody talk together. And I think at that point, we could go on for hours, but we need to stop. We have come to the natural end. And I thank thank Jaap, of course, for his great introduction, and thank all the panel for taking time and presenting so very clearly in the fields that we were looking at. So I hand back now to Stefan. Stefan, you use oncological drugs, so you have been part of this discussion inside.
So this, thank you, George. Thank you, Jaap. Thank you, all members of the panel. For me, this was really a treat because, you know, I learned a lot from this meeting. It's fascinating. We're touching a lot of the key issues that we have to change in order to get much more rapid progress and then have people benefit from that progress. There are two different things. Now, I want to say that FEAM has a long-term project to really fight for a more uniform practice of healthcare, of reimbursements, and of biomedical research funding. And I think that with George and other board members, we're going to set up a project and we're going to really attack this problem, which is at the root of a lot of difficulties. And it is this idea that each country can do everything on their own and they have no obligation to put anything in common because the healthcare remained a competence of the national authorities. I think this issue will need to change. The COVID-19 has shown that this issue cannot remain the same. And I think Jaap's slide with the scattered landscape says it all. I think if I would sum up everything that we discussed today, and we see this scattered landscape in which patients, academia, industry, and regulators do not participate in all the process, don't have feedback. And I'm going to give you one quick example that I know directly of, a phase 3 clinical trial by a big pharma that went and failed. And I think that it failed because it was early on possible to test better whether the compound they were using, the procedure, actually induced the biomarker that said that the procedure worked. Not that the cancer responded, but when you say you're going to give something to inhibit a target or a vaccine to immunize, you have to show that then you actually do it, and then you're going to evaluate in the phase 3 whether this changes the disease. But what happens, unfortunately, sometimes is that, you know, every project becomes a purpose in itself. And then people need that project, and then they don't really look carefully at all the steps. And this is how academia is not consulted and academic rules are not invoked. When a big project like that wants to take over and take off, then they go through to the end. But in fact, sometimes vaccines simply don't induce immunity. And therefore, you're not going to evaluate the immunity effect on cancer, but you're going to evaluate some other detail. But for the public, this procedure will be compromised then, right? Because nobody will do it again, phase 3. So those are very important issues. And I think I remember, I took notes very actively, so I didn't participate that much in the discussion because I was really interested in everything that was said here. And the last thing I'm going to say is that Europe could be a much better critical mass for biomedical research if we would have minimum standards of diagnostic of all the diseases based on WHO criteria in all countries. And those involve mutations, genomic alterations, expression alterations, and in many countries, especially former Eastern European countries, those things are simply not done. Therefore, the patients cannot be eligible for studies, and the critical mass becomes much smaller. Now, I would like to thank the panel members, and I would not stop without thanking Novartis for sponsoring this event, Elisa Corritore for organizing it, and all the members of the staff of the FEAM. And I look forward to progress in all the areas that we discussed today. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, as I said, we could have carried on for ages, but we have food for thought. And thank you all very much. Bye-bye.